Hello, good day and welcome to this session on logistics. By the end of this session, students should be able to explain the origin of the term logistics, as well as discuss the history of the practice of logistics in the business sector, and then define the term logistics. Let's start with the origin of the term logistics. Logistics is a word that seems to be little understood by most people to the extent that some people confuse it with the study of knowledge, in other terms, linguistics. Logistics basically evolved or came from the French word logistique, which is derived from logger, meaning quarters, as in quartering troops in relation to military. So the term logistics is dominantly associated or evolved from military era, where supplies were made available to military troops in time to meet their health as well as food needs. So let's look at the history of the practice of logistics in the business sector. Logistics basically evolved from the military sector, and it has been in existence for as long as there has been organized armed forces. Hence, the term describes a very old practice where military personnel were supplied with food and battle supplies in terms of battle conditions as well as peacetime situations. The practice of logistics in the business sector started in the latter half of the 20th century and has been increasingly recognized as a critical discipline. It can be noted that the first professional association of logisticians was formed in 1963, and a group of practitioners and academicians formed the National Council of Physical Distribution Management, a key concept which comes to play when you hear about logistics, which also became the Council of Logistics Management in 1985, and then in 2004, the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. Today, the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals has thousands of members around the world. They also have a sister organization, that is the International Society of Logistics, which was founded in 1966. What then comes to mind when you are defining the term logistics? It refers to the process of planning, implementing, and controlling the efficient, cost-effective flow and storage of raw materials, in-process inventory, finished goods, and related information from point of origin to point of consumption for the purpose of conforming to customer requirements. So logistics, when you take a typical supply chain, logistics is what facilitates the movement of goods, raw materials, and other supplies, both upwards and downwards in the supply chain. So suppliers provide the focal firm with raw materials. In order for the raw materials to move from the suppliers to the manufacturer's place, they utilize logistics systems. Also, when the goods get to the manufacturer's facility, the goods have to be moved within their facility. That activity is also characterized by logistics. And then after the products have been manufactured, for it to be able to reach customers, the activities that entail or are involved in moving the product from manufacturers to customers is also a logistics activity. Therefore, we can conclude from the definition that has been provided that logistics is the management of material and information flow. Information in the sense that as materials are moving, related information as to quantity needed, time that they are needed is associated with those flows. Also, we all know that information not only flows downwards in the supply chain, but it also moves upwards. So for manufacturers to know how much customers want, there has to be information flow. For suppliers to also know what manufacturers want, there has to be information flow. So information flows within a supply chain, but materials move downwards in a supply chain. and whatever facilitates the smooth and effective flow of these two resources is what we term as logistics. So let's look at material flow. Material flow, as we have earlier established, is downwards in nature because raw materials are moved to manufacturers to convert to products, which are also then moved downwards to customers and finally to consumers for consumption. And the aim of material flow or its management is to keep materials flowing from source to end customer. It is a continuous and synchronous flow without interruptions, which ensures that parts and components are delivered on time in the proper sequence and exactly to the point that they are needed. A look at information flow, which occurs within the organization or within a supply chain, that is across. So both upwards and downwards, and they also have to be effectively managed so as to ensure that suppliers and focal firms receive proper information, and then customers are also supplying the proper information so that in the end they are satisfied with the provided goods and services. Given that it has been established earlier that logistics is what ensures that goods or information or material move in a supply chain, it can be determined the logistics can be classified into two. That is, into inbound logistics, outbound logistics, and internal logistics, which is otherwise known as materials management. So inbound logistics is basically what happens where the manufacturer receives good and raw materials from suppliers. So as goods move from the suppliers to the manufacturer is having an inbound logistics happening in their focal firm. And then outbound logistics is where the goods have been made or converted from raw material stage to finished goods, and they have to move from the manufacturing firm to the customers. So the movement of goods from the manufacturing firm outward their organization is what we call the outbound logistics. Then we have internal logistics, which is mostly known as materials management. Is what happens when goods move within the boundaries of a focal firm. That is, after goods move from suppliers to the manufacturing firm through inbound logistics, how they are moved from the receiving point to the operations or manufacturing plants for it to be converted, packaged, and then sent to the dispatch yard. All the related activities is what we term as internal logistics or materials management. So the movements within, the movement into, and the movement outside of the organization raises two major concerns in supply chains, one of them being reverse logistics. Because the nature of logistics has mostly been about how materials move in a linear flow. But this raises sustainability concerns because the materials end up in the environment with no duty of care as to how the waste is managed. So there needs to be systems in place to ensure that the materials move outside the supply and the consumers section back into the supply chain so that value can be captured from the goods. In essence, if manufacturing firms make products available to customers, after customers are done using it, there has to be what we call extended producer responsibility, where steps are taken to ensure that the used products come back into the system for us to capture value from them in the form of recycling or reusing. This leads to the second concern, which is waste, such that it prevents indiscriminate littering in the environment, and in the end the environment is clean and everyone is protected and sustainable development is achieved. In this session, we have learned about the term logistics, the types of flows in logistics, as well as the three basic classifications of logistics and two major concerns with modern logistics.